There's new evidence, including satellite images, that appear to show North Korea is building more missiles. The Washington Post is reporting that intelligence officials say work is underway on one or possibly two new intercontinental ballistic missiles that could theoretically reach the United States. After the summit in Singapore, President Trump declared that the nuclear threat from North Korea was over. And as recently as a couple of weeks ago, he also said there was no rush for North Korea to dismantle its arsenal. Susan Glasser is a CNN Global Affairs analyst, staff writer at The New Yorker. Josh Rogin is a columnist for The Washington Post. He's also a CNN political analyst. Guys, thanks very much for joining us. So what do you think? All of a sudden, the nuclear threat was over, everything is great, and now there's indications the North Koreans are working on some new intercontinental ballistic missiles.
You know, that's what happens when you eat dessert before breakfast. And, you know, this process of the North Korea nuclear deal was really a deal in name only. And so Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is still filling in the details. North Korea never agreed to dismantle its intercontinental ballistic missiles, and that's what brought them to the table. So in that sense, of course, they're not going to give up the thing. That's actually their development of one that could reach the United States is why, arguably, Trump was negotiating with them in the first place.
Right. This is what the North Koreans do. This is what negotiating with North Korea is like. Pompeo knows that, okay? He bought the ticket. Now he's got to take the ride all the way to the end, okay? And they're not going to give up anything without something in return. And what they want next is they want a declaration of the end of hostilities of the Korean War, a path towards a peace treaty and normalization. What the U.S. wants is for North Korea to declare its nuclear arsenal. That's the first step that we want. There's an opportunity. Mike Pompeo is going to Singapore for a meeting where the North Korean Foreign Minister, Ri Yong-ho, is going to be there. It's expected they're going to have a talk. In advance of that, the White House held a high-level meeting chaired by John Bolton on Friday to discuss what they're going to do. All right, this is going to be a very long process. Patient diplomacy, one step forward, two steps back. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better.
All right, let's talk about Iran while I have you guys, because yesterday the president at that news conference with the Italian prime minister, he was asked about Iran, and he very flatly, all of a sudden, despite the threats of a few days earlier, said, you know, he's ready for direct talks. I want to play precisely what he said, and then I want you to listen to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, because he, quote, clarified what the president said.
I believe in meeting. I would certainly meet with Iran if they wanted to meet. I don't know that they're ready yet. They're having a hard time right now. No preconditions. No. They want to meet, I'll meet. Anytime they want.
If the Iranians demonstrate a commitment to make fundamental changes in how they treat their own people, reduce their malign behavior, can agree that it's worthwhile to enter a nuclear agreement that actually prevents proliferation, then the president said he's prepared to sit down and have a conversation with them.
Except that's not what the president said. The president said no preconditions at all. And Secretary Pompeo outlined three specific, very tough conditions that the Iranians would have to endorse before there could be such a meeting.
You know, being Secretary of State for Donald Trump means you're on perpetual cleanup duty when it comes to issues like this. Secretary Pompeo has a really tough job in that Trump has given to all caps tweets in the middle of the night. He's given to big pronouncements that seem at odds with the negotiating strategy, even if perhaps privately there's more coordination than we realize to some of those tweets, which I think is often the case. But, you know, interestingly, I think that we thought, well, gee, Mike Pompeo is going to be different than Rex Tillerson. And obviously, he's been more successful so far in managing his relationship with the president. But on this Iran issue, if you listen to his remarkable testimony last week, it's very similar, right? He's saying there is no change in U.S. policy. Don't pay attention to exactly what the president of the United States says. I'm going to fill in the blanks for you. And so my question is, how long is that going to work as a Trump management strategy? And then there's the question of the Iranians. I think, you know, Josh, they're going to be a lot less likely to come to the table right away than the North Koreans were.
There was a statement from the Iranian Foreign Ministry that was broadcast on state television in Iran saying, not so fast, we're not yet ready to meet with President Trump.
Right. Trump may think that Iran is like North Korea. If we get real belligerent and then we play nice, they'll come to the table and make a deal. Iran is not North Korea. You have to ask yourself, why would they come to the table now? What Iran is actually doing right now is they're working with our allies to stay in the deal that we left to isolate us, okay? And it's working, okay? So they have more cards than North Korea. They have a different kind of country, a different kind of government than North Korea. What Pompeo laid out is, well, if Iran changes its government, changes all its activities, and then yields to all of our demands, then we can talk. Well, that's a recipe for policy stagnation and diplomatic intransigence, okay? So we're looking at a standoff with Iran that's going to last a very, very long time, no matter what Pompeo or Trump says or
Because
tweets.
the preconditions that Secretary Pompeo laid out, those are tough preconditions for any Iranian regime. President Rouhani, is he going to accept a commitment to make fundamental changes in how the Iranian regime treats their own people, reduce their malign behavior, and they have to agree to enter into a nuclear agreement that actually prevents proliferation. And remember, the State Department still regards the Iranian regime as the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism.
Well, that's right. And that's where you see this conflict between Trump and Pompeo. Again, Pompeo just gave a very strongly worded speech at the Ronald Reagan Library in California in which he basically encouraged opponents of the regime to rise up against it.
Sounds like regime change.
Well, that's right, number one. Number two, you still have a legally binding UN resolution, that the six major powers in the world agreed to in negotiating with Iran. The United States unilaterally walked out of that. No one else has ripped up the deal. It's a much harder thing to negotiate with a country after you've just unilaterally ripped up a deal with it, which is not the case with North Korea.
And if the administration is demanding that Iran give us a great, fabulous deal, how are they going to defend a deal with North Korea that doesn't meet those standards? They've got two different philosophies, two different ideologies. Neither of them really seems to be working. And what you've got is broad confusion, both inside the government, outside the government, around Washington, around the world, about what the policy actually is. And that cannot be a good thing either for the United States or its interests or values.
Rogin, Susan Glasser, guys, thanks.